Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. Today in this video we will discuss about with the Whitsun Weddings by Philip Larkin. Let's start. An introduction to the Whitsun Weddings. The Whitsun Weddings was written by British poet Philip Larkin and first published in his collection The Whitsun Weddings in 1963. The poem recounts the speaker's strange journey from the east of England to London and his observations along the way. At first, the speaker focuses on the view out of the window of the countryside and passing towns. Soon, though, his journey is interrupted by the loud commotion of numerous wedding parties. A number of young couples have gotten married on that auspicious weekend. It was because of the long bank holiday weekend and a tax break. As the speaker observes all these newlyweds, he reflects rather ambivalently on what it means to be in love and all the ceremony tied up with getting married. Soon enough, the train arrives in London, and this frail travelling coincidence is over. Travelling by train from Hull to London on Whitsun, Larkin notices the newly married couples waiting with their friends and relatives at the stations. The poem begins as a description of the journey and the wedding crowds, but gradually develops into a reflection on marriage, the journey becoming an image of the journey through life which these newlywed couples have elected to make together. Summary of the poem. In the first stanza, the speaker situates the poem on Whitsun or Whit Sunday, the seventh Sunday after Easter, and then a popular time for weddings in Britain. He describes a leisurely, hot day on a lonely, three-quarters empty train and begins to detail the sights the train passes by, such as a dock and a river, the breadth of the wide landscape with no people mentioned mirrors the mostly empty train, and both create a sense of isolation for the lone traveler. Though the speaker mentions being late in the first line, concerns of time seem irrelevant on the train, where all sense of being in a hurry is gone. The second stanza continues the description of the peaceful landscape introduced in the first stanza. The train travels slowly on the hot day, passing farms, canals, and other natural sights. Again, no people appear, heightening the sense of isolation. The train passes through several towns, but they are nondescript, boring, and monotonous. Beginning the third stanza, the speaker mentions that he initially did not notice the ubiquitous weddings that appear at each station. Distracted by the heat, he pays little attention to the cool shade where the couples stand. The couples are pomaded for the special occasion, meaning that pomade, a scented ointment, has been applied to their scalps, and the women all wear similar dresses that the speaker criticizes, calling them parodies of fashion. In contrast to what one might expect of a deeply in love couple preparing to start their lives together. These couples are irresolute or uncertain. The poet persona continues to describe the wedded couples who catch his curiosity in the fourth stanza, yet he views the scene critically and depicts the people involved in a grotesque manner, mocking the appearances of the fathers and mothers. the inappropriate speech of an uncle, and the myriad of accessories the brides wear, such as nylon gloves and costume jewelry. In the fifth stanza, the speaker clarifies that these couples are returning from their weddings as the day is coming to an end, and people return from various wedding venues, from cafes to banquet halls. He emphasizes the sheer number of newlyweds present at every stop. New couples board the train. The speaker also notes that despite the festivity of the celebrations, the children present seem same bored just as he is. In the sixth stanza, the fathers of the newlyweds are seen to be amazed by the scope of the weddings, but also view them as farcical or ridiculous and absurd, while the mothers bond over their shared experience of attending the weddings, which the speaker likens to a happy funeral or an oxymoron. The wedding attendees are free at last after a perhaps tedious ceremony, and the speaker returns to characterizing the landscape outside the train. At the beginning of the seventh stanza, the 50 minutes referenced in the previous stanza that the wedding goers are on the trains is just enough time to complain about. I nearly died. Whether because of the heat or the boring ride, the train passes an Odeon, a British movie theatre chain. The speaker characterizes the wedding goers as self-absorbed, each ignoring the other wedding parties they would never meet, though they are all united on the train for an hour. Meanwhile, the speaker thinks of his destination of London. The train passes other trains and walls of moss as the final stanza begins, and the overlap in the passengers' lives, Larkin's frail traveling coincidence is almost over. As the train slows and arrives, the speaker feels like he is falling and compares this sensation to a shower of arrows turning into rain. Question 1. How does Philip Larkin use irony in the poem The Whitsun Weddings? There are many touches of irony in the poem The Whitsun Weddings. Here, Larkin has given us an account of a railway journey which he made from Oxford to Hull. The manner in which he has described the sights which he saw from the window of the railway train by which he made the journey is mostly ironical. To make only one example, Larkin has described the girls standing on the railway stations as grinning and pomaded in parodies of fashion, heels and veils. This girl stood there irresolutely. The poem highlights differences in tastes and values, as we see in the speaker's comic but rather prim response to girls in parodies of fashion. The poet makes a philosophical statement on marriage as moments of painful loss and separations, as well as celebration. Marriage is here described not only as a joyful occasion but as a happy funeral and a religious wounding. Second question. Write a critical appreciation on Philip Larkin's poem The Whitsun Weddings. The description in the poem is graphic, as is always the case with the imagery in Larkin's other poems. It was a sunlit Saturday. The poet noticed the rear sides of house on the way, a street of binding windscreens, the river's broad and level waters, wide palms, the cattle casting short shadows on the ground, canals with floating of industrial fruits, and an acre of dismantled cars. There are many touches of irony in the poem, The Whitsun Weddings. Here Larkin has given us an account of a railway journey which he made from Oxford to Hull. The manner in which he has described the girls, fathers, mothers, and uncles. We see fathers with seamy foreheads, we see fathers with seamy foreheads, the mothers loud and fat, and uncles shouting smart, the women wearing nylon gloves and imitation jewelry. The descriptions of the newly married couples are also interesting to note. The stanza pattern is loosely based on the odes of John Keats, though the form used throughout is Larkin's own. Question 3. Write a critical note on Philip Larkin as a poet of the movement group with reference to his poem, The Whitsun Weddings. Answer. The term movement refers to the work of a group of poets of the 1950s. This group shared a common values and assumptions closely related to the moods and conditions of the post-war England. The description in the poem is graphic, as is always the case with the imagery in Larkin's other poems. It was a sunlit Saturday. The poem describes a rain journey which Larkin once made from Hull to London on Whitsun Saturday. It offers a sweeping panoramic view of the contemporary landscape and uses the journey as a way of structuring its multiple and disparate perceptions. It begins with the poet telling us started from Hull on a sunlit Saturday. All the windows of the train were down, all the cushions were hot, and there was absolutely no sense of urgency in Larkin's mind. The poet saw the backs of houses on the way, a street of blinding windscreen, the river waters, white farms, the cattle casting short shadows on the ground, canals with floating of industrial froth, and acres of dismantled cars. In addition to such sights, the poem also contains a graphic description of the people on the railway platforms and the people getting into the train. The poet satirically described the girls standing on the railway stations as grinning and pomaded in parodies of fashion, heels, and veils. There were fathers with their broad belts and seamy foreheads, mothers loud and fat, an uncle shouting smart, and ladies wearing nylon gloves and imitation jewelry of variegated colors. Next question. Write a short critical note on Philip Larkin's perceptions of nature in the poem, The Whitsun Weddings. Answer. The description in the poem is graphic, as is always the case with the imagery in Larkin's other poems. It was a sunlit Saturday. The poet noticed the rare sights of houses on the way, a street of binding windscreens, the river's broad and level waters, wide farms, the cattle casting short shadows on the ground, canals with floating of industrial froths, and an acre of dismantled cars. This poem records not only the sights witnessed by Larkin, but also his personal reactions to what he saw. Here the poet states his attitude to the changing landscapes of the post-war England, as well as to the lives of people who dwell there. The landscapes in the poem range over town and country, over places of work and leisure. The insertion of a cooling tower, for instance, between an Odeon cinema and a cricket field is significant. Larkin's England is a place of long established agricultural and industrial milieu. White farms went by, canals with floating of industrial froth. The poem, according to Stephen Regan, makes extensive use of the urban pastoral perspectives to impose a sense of unity and continuity upon geographical and historical divisions. Metaphorically, Larkin's British suburban landscape is sometimes acres of dismantled cars, sometimes postal districts packed like squares of wheat. Next question, locate and annotate. The river's level drifting began where Skye and Lincolnshire and water meet. The above lines are taken from the first stanza of the poem. The speaker illustrates an image of natural harmony. Despite the rapid succession of images appearing as the train travels and the blinding effect of the windscreens, a British term for windshields, the river is united with the sky and the landscape of the country of Lincolnshire. This harmony falls apart later in the poem when the images of industrialization interrupt and overtake the pastoral scenes. The train's running is in contrast with its lazy pace in the beginning of the stanza. Next question, locate and annotate. The women shared secret like a happy funeral, while girls, gripping their handbags tighter, stared at a religious wounding. These lines are quoted from the sixth stanza of the poem. In these lines, the speaker likens the aftermath of the weddings to two other Christian occasions, a funeral, though a happy one, and a religious wounding, perhaps a reference to crucifixion or stigmata, the mystical manifestation of wounds emulating those of Christ. The happy funeral is an oxymoron, referring to the death of single life and the unification and rebirth into a shared life that comes with marriage, while the religious wounding also refers to the traditional loss of virginity on the wedding night, during which a woman bleeds. In this manner, the speaker assigns this increasingly outdated wedding ritual a religious significance. The beginning of these lines carries a double meaning. None of the couples think of their fellow newlyweds, whose lives run parallel to births separate from their own, but they also do not think of those they could later meet and have relationships with had they not married. In addition, the wedding parties do not contemplate the significance of sharing this brief moment together, after which they will likely disappear from each other's lives. Only the speaker seems to be taking in the full meaning of the moment. Short questions with answers. First question, what is the setting and occasion of the poem The Whitsun Weddings? Answer, the poem The Whitsun Weddings is set on Whitsun Saturday in mid-1950s United Kingdom. Because of the tax exemption and marriage laws in the UK at that time, the Whitsun weekend in May was an advantageous time to get married. Comment on the autobiographical elements of the poem The Whitsun Weddings. The poem The Whitsun Weddings is an autobiographical poem as it describes an actual train journey which the poet himself made from Hull to London. Because of the tax exemption and marriage laws in the UK at that time, the Whitsun weekend in May was an advantageous time to get married. According to the poet himself, the poem records his own experiences of a train journey. Next question. What is the meaning of the word Whitsun in the poem The Whitsun Weddings? The word Whitsun refers to the festival. Whitsun Sunday is the seventh Sunday after Christmas. Because of the tax exemption and marriage laws in the UK at that time, the Whitsun weekend in May was an advantageous time to get married. Question 4. What is diacope? Give an example of diacope from the poem. Answer. Diacope is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is repeated with a small number of intervening words. The fifth line of the poem, The Whitsun Weddings, all windows down, all cushions hot, all sense, gives the reader a sense of the uniformity of the train compartment, which again anticipates something the poem developed later, the uniformity of the wedding parties. Next question. When was the poem The Whitsun written? The poem The Whitsun Weddings is set on Whitsun Saturday in mid-1950s United Kingdom. Because of the tax exemption and marriage laws in the UK at that time, the Whitsun weekend in May was an advantageous time to get married. According to an Andrew Motion, the poem was composed on the 18th October 1958, nearly 2 years after it was begun. Next question. What is the condition of the train when the poet persona boarded the train in the poem The Whitsun Weddings? The train was 3/4 empty when the poet persona boarded the train. All the windows of the train were down, all the cushions were hot, and there were no hurry and worry about anything. Next question. How does the poet describe fathers, mothers, uncles, and girls in the poem in The Whitsun Weddings? The poet saw fathers wearing broad belts under their coats, fat mothers speaking in loud voices, uncle abusing in filthy language ladies with their perfumed hair, and newly married couples got into the train to make that noisy. Next question. How does the poet describe marriage in the poem The Whitsun Weddings? Answer. The poet has used the phrases a happy funeral and a religious wounding in the poem to explain marriage. He means to say that marriage is a happy event since it has celebration. It is a funeral at the same time because it carries within it seeds of death in the family and future. Similarly, the ceremony of marriage is here described as a religious wounding because the ceremony would turn out to be a painful affair later on. Thus, Larkin reveals his cynical view on marriage. Question 9. How does the poet describe landscapes in the poem The Whitsun Weddings? Answer. The poet noticed the rear sides of houses on the way, a street of windscreens, the river's broad and level waters, wide farms, the cattle casting short shadows on the ground, canals with floating of industrial floats, and an acre of dismantled cars. Question 10. How does the poet describe the industrial fruits in the poem, The Whitsun Weddings? Answer. The poet has used the phrases floating of industrial fruits in the poem to explain industrial wastage. The picture refers to the junction point of two eras, the era of nature and the era of industrialization. Question 11. Locate and annotate. A sense of falling, like an arrow shower, sent out of sight, somewhere becoming rain. These lines are taken from Philip Larkin's poem, The Whitsun Weddings. The poem, The Whitsun Wedding, is a poem about a train journey as well as a marriage. Here we find an image that is noteworthy. The excitement and hope of the honeymooners is compared to a shower of arrows shot somewhere into the future, out of sight. Last question, question 12. What is Pullman in the poem, The Whitsun Weddings? Pullman is a particular railway carriage or a train consisting of such coaches. It was founded by George Pullman. The Pullman Palace Car Company was popular in the late 19th and early 20th century America and Europe. Pullman is an old type of luxury train. Okay, that's it. Hope you like it.